This episode of Cello Chat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com.
And we're now live.
Hi, everybody. This is Michael Kannen. I'm so thrilled to be back at Cello Bello, and especially honored to have been asked to do the very first ensemble chat for Cello Bello, an exciting new development. And Paul Katz has wanted to expand the offerings of Cello Bello to include ensembles. Of course, Paul's life has been deeply, deeply involved in chamber music, and this seems like a great development. And so when Paul asked me to do this, I enthusiastically accepted, and then I started casting around for a subject. What should I talk about for ensemble chat? And my first thought was, since I've also spent my entire life in chamber music, either playing it or teaching it, that I would talk about the role of the cello in chamber music, because that's something that I love. I love all the different ways that the cello is in chamber music, string quartets, groups with piano. And I thought, okay, I'll talk about those different roles, and maybe I'll talk about the my favorite chamber music cellists. And then I realized that that's exactly the presentation that I gave the last time I did a Cello Bello talk. And so I thought, okay, let's not do that again. And then I started to get the feeling as I thought about it that what I really wanted to do was talk about repertoire, to talk about a piece that I love, to share it with you, share why I love it. And so that's what I decided to do. So then I had to decide what piece. And it was then that I realized the timing of this talk and the fact that we are just a little over a week away from our election, which of course has been taking us so much of our attention. And then I knew immediately what piece I wanted to talk about. There was no question. You know, there are some areas in the world where people question whether classical music, and particularly the canon that we so deeply love, is really relevant to today's world. And of course, my answer to that is yes, of course it's relevant. Classical music will always be relevant, because so long as there are humans, classical music is going to be a part of the human experience, because it's an art that speaks so deeply and fundamentally to who we are as humans. But every once in a while, there's a piece that actually speaks very directly and very profoundly to the exact historical moment that we're in. And the piece that I'd like to talk about today is such a piece, and I think spectacularly so. I'm going to talk about the Ode to Napoleon by Arnold Schoenberg. This is a piece I've played many times, many times. It's a piece that I love. Just as an experience, I think it's just incredible piece, really entertaining, super fun to play, and audiences generally love it. So what I'd like to do today is take you through this piece, kind of break it down, give you some background about it, show you how it's put together, how Schoenberg put it together, and to play some chunks of it for you, and then to show you why I think this piece is the perfect piece, the most pertinent and important piece for today, for this very, very direct moment in our history. So we will get going. Let me share my screen with you. I'm going to do this, we're going to do that, and we're going to do that. And I'm assuming that now you can see, and Isaac will tell me if you can't, but this piece by Schoenberg has its origins in the Second World War. Schoenberg is very concerned and very angry and kind of desolate about Hitler and what's happening in Europe. The year that we're concerned with is 1941, and in particular, the very end of 1941. And in 1941, Schoenberg is living in California. He's not only living in California, he's living in Los Angeles. And not just Los Angeles, but Hollywood. Here's a photo of, on the left, of Schoenberg with his family in California. You see the palm trees and things, which always seemed like almost a little bit of a cognitive dissonance to see Schoenberg there in sunny Southern California, but there he was. And what was he doing in California? Well, many Jewish musicians, well, many Jewish people, many Jewish artists fled Europe in order to escape the Nazi juggernaut. And as we know, America took a good number of them, by no means not all of them, but the ones who were able to get in, many went to New York, but many went to California and to Los Angeles, and a real community of musicians, of these immigrant musicians, gathered there. Schoenberg was one of them. When you hear those great movie scores from the 40s and the 50s, those amazing sounding orchestras, a lot of those musicians were these refugees from Europe, from the Vienna Philharmonic and the Berlin Philharmonic, who made their way to Hollywood and then made their living in the studio orchestras. So that's what Schoenberg is doing there. Meanwhile, in the world, in Europe, Hitler is advancing on Russia. Hitler is following in Napoleon's footsteps, trying to conquer Russia. And of course, well, and at that time, that's the Soviet Union, right? So the thing is that if Hitler is successful and conquers the Soviet Union, it's over, and Hitler will have won. There is no doubt. This was the key sort of front in this war. And the German refugees in California are very, very worried that he will be successful. So it's a time of great stress and great anxiety. And then, as we all know, in December of 1941, Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, and a reluctant United States is drawn into the world. So that's sort of the context for when this piece was born. In January, so just a month later, in 1942, Schoenberg receives a commission from the League of Composers for a short chamber work. League of Composers is an important new music organization based in New York, I believe, and they contact Schoenberg and say, will you write a piece for us? And Schoenberg says, absolutely, I would like to do that. Schoenberg is on record that when talking about this commission, as having said, I knew it was the moral duty of intellectuals to take a stand against tyranny. So he didn't want to write an abstract piece. He decided he wanted to write a piece that spoke to this highly charged and perilous moment in world history. And so he casts around and he comes upon a poem by Lord Byron called Ode to Napoleon. Actually, maybe he knew of this poem beforehand and had always wanted to set it. I don't know. But this seemed the perfect moment to him to set the Ode to Napoleon. Now, many of you, most of you will know that Byron was the great Romantic poet. He lived from 1788 to 1824. So we musicians recognize that that's the time of Beethoven, right? So he and Beethoven working in the world kind of at the same time. Now, this poem, this long poem, is an absolutely unbelievable diatribe against Napoleon. Lord Byron, like so many people, and particularly the artists and intellectuals of the time, had put his great faith in Napoleon. After the American Revolution, successful, came the French Revolution, and there was this great hope that as the French monarchy was toppled, that there would be a domino effect and monarchies across Europe would be toppled. An age of democracy would be would be led in, and the Enlightenment ideals of equality would come to pass. And of course, they put their hopes in Napoleon. But as we all know, Napoleon foiled those hopes, crowned himself emperor. And this was an act that was a bitter disappointment, to say the least, to everybody. As we all know, famously, the other guy who was really, really upset about this fall of Napoleon was Beethoven. And Beethoven, who originally planned his Third Symphony to be dedicated to Napoleon, became so enraged and disappointed that he crossed out the dedication to Napoleon, renamed it the Eroica Symphony. Here we see the manuscript of that title page, and you can see very clearly where he crossed out the name of Napoleon so rigorously that he broke right through the paper. So we have these figures. We have Napoleon doing his thing, and we have artists like Byron and Beethoven expressing their bitter disappointment at what was happening. So with this piece, Ode to Napoleon, we have this really interesting constellation of characters or spirits in the piece. We have Napoleon, who sort of inspired this whole thing. We have Beethoven and Byron, who responded to Napoleon. We have Hitler, who is now a new tyrant in Europe, and all of this is being tied together by Schoenberg. So we have many, many layers already in this piece of interest. The Ode to Napoleon. As you can see, Schoenberg scored his piece for string quartet and piano, or piano quintet, and reciter. Okay? The entire Ode to Napoleon poem that Byron wrote is recited over the course of this piece. It is just the setting of the recitation of the poem. As I said, the poem expresses this disappointment with Napoleon. In the poem, over the course of this poem, Byron compares Napoleon to the great tyrants of history. There are a lot of references to somewhat obscure historical figures, but he also expresses his disappointment in the most bitter and sarcastic and chiding tones. It's spectacular in its sarcasm. I mean, he just eviscerates Napoleon in this poem. It's a fairly long poem, 19 stanzas, 171 lines altogether, and all of them do we hear in this piece. Now, what I'd like to do is go through some of the opening stanzas of the poetry so that, it's not an easy poem, okay? And so I just want to explicate it a little bit, start to orient you into into what's going on with this piece, okay? So the first few stanzas, the poem starts, "'Tis done." Well, what's done? Well, Napoleon is done. That's who's done. He has now been defeated, humiliated, and is in exile on his little island. But yesterday he was a king. He was armed with kings. He had backing. And now thou art a nameless thing, so abject. Byron says, now we can't even name you. You have fallen so far. Abject, but you are alive. Is this the man of thousand thrones who strewed our earth with hostile bones? And can he thus survive? Is this the guy who had all of this power, and all he did was he strewed the earth with bones and destruction? Since he miscalled the morning star, no man nor fiend hath fallen so far. Nobody went from such an exalted place to such an abject failure. Ill-minded man, why scourge thy kind who bowed so low the knee? Why did you turn on us who had so much hope for you and so much respect for you? By gazing on thyself grown blind, thou taughtst the rest to see. Your own self-centeredness and narcissism caused you to go blind to who you were or who you would become, but you taught us to see what that was. With might unquestioned, power to save, like power to burn, your only gift has been the grave to those that worship thee. With all that power, all you gave us was death and destruction. Nor till thy fall could mortals guess ambitions less than littleness. Your ambition is less than nothing, basically. Thanks for that lesson. It will teach to after warriors more than high philosophy can preach and vainly preached before. Thank you for teaching us this lesson, because it will teach future warriors more than words. Your actions to tell us much more than the philosophy that's been preached to us and preached to people before. That spell upon the minds of men breaks, never to unite again. We were in your spell. The spell is broken. We will never go back. That led them to adore those pagan things. The scepter and that sway which man seemed made but to obey. We all got mesmerized by your scepter and your sword and your power. Um, dark spirit, what must be the madness of thy memory? Like, basically, how can you live with yourself? How can you live with what you have done? The desolator, desolate. The victor, overthrown. The arbiter of others' fate, a suppliant for his own. So the tables have been turned. The desolator is now desolate. The winner is now the loser. The person who had everyone's fate in his hands is now begging for his own fate. Is it yet imperial hope that with such change can calmly cope? Like, how are you going to deal with this, and why? Is it because you think you can overcome it, or are you just afraid of death? And then he says, to die a prince or live a slave, thy choice is most ignobly brave. Basically, what Byron is saying here is that you made the choice. You could have killed yourself, or you could have chosen to live as a prisoner, and you chose to live as a prisoner. And probably that wasn't the right choice. Like, maybe it would have been better for everyone if you had just done away with yourself. So this is the level. You can see Byron is pissed. He is really, really angry and upset, and he pours it out into this poem. So I would like to show you now. I want to listen to the beginning of this piece, the first 3 or 4 minutes. That includes the stanzas that we just went through. I want to show you how Schoenberg wrote this, how he set it up. Okay, so this is just 2 random pages from the score. By the way, maybe some of you know this piece. Maybe some of you have played this piece. I suspect many of you do not know it. I'm hoping that you'll be interested enough to check it out and maybe play it someday. So, okay, so you have the score. It's like a regular piano quintet. And then you can see that the text, Schoenberg put it on a single line stave like that. And there are notes that go either above or below or on that line. And those are not notes to be sung. They're not pitches. They are indications of inflection. He's showing the speaker exactly how to use his voice, whether it goes up, it goes down. I mean, Schoenberg was so controlling that he actually used accidentals. I'm not quite sure what that is. But the most important thing to notice is that the rhythm is exactly notated, because the reciter in this is absolutely a part of the ensemble. It's really a sextet. And the rhythms for the poem must be recited precisely and exactly with the instruments. So you need to have a musician really doing the recitation. It's most often a singer, but someone who reads music and hopefully has good rhythm, because it really has to be very, very precise. A funny story, just as an aside here, apparently at some point, and I'm imagining it was after the war, Schoenberg was approached by one of the big movie studios in Hollywood, and he was asked if he would be interested in providing a movie score for an upcoming film, if he would score the film. And Schoenberg actually was very interested. He said, "I would love to do that." And he said, "But there's just one thing that I require, and that's that all the actors and the actresses in the movie have to speak according to the exact rhythms that I will provide for them." And I imagine if that was a phone call, I imagine the movie mogul saying, "Arnie, great idea. Love it. Love it. Listen, I'll get back to you on that one." And that was probably the last that Schoenberg heard because that project never happened. So anyway, okay. Let's listen to the opening few minutes of the Ode to Napoleon. The piece begins with an instrumental introduction. You'll hear at the beginning a depiction of the absolute hysteria and anxiety of the moment. The piece just screams into existence. And then he lays out some of the important motives that he will explore in the piece, musical motives. And then after a time, the voice enters. One of the things that I want you to really notice as we listen to the excerpts of this piece is that Schoenberg set the poem in the most vivid and almost obvious way. It's really obvious tone painting, almost like movie music or even cartoon music, where everything that happens in the piece sort of is a reflection or comments on the words that are being said. It's very vivid. So we'll listen to a little bit of this. On the next frame here, you'll see the performers of this piece, and you will note that it's being conducted by Pierre Boulez. I would like to go on record here as saying this piece does not need to be conducted. Okay, I've played it many times, never with a conductor. I think it's really probably better without a conductor. But that being said, this is a very good performance. And by these musicians and Pierre Boulez. So here we go.
done. But yesterday a king, and armed with kings to strive, and now thou art a nameless thing, so abject, yet alive. Is this the man of 1,000 thrones, who stood our earth with hostile homes? And can he thus survive? Since he miscalled the morning star, no man nor fiend hath fallen so far. Ill-minded man, why scourge thy kind who bowed so low the knee? By gazing on thyself grown blind, thou taught'st the rest to see. With might unquestioned, power to save, thine only gift has been the grave to those that worship thee. Nor till thy fall could mortals guess ambitions less than little less. Thanks for that lesson. It will teach to us the warriors more than high philosophy can preach, and vainly preached before. That spell upon the minds of men breaks, never to unite again, that led them to adore those pig-god things of saber sway, with fronts of brass and feet of clay.
Okay, so there you get a good idea of kind of the sound world of this piece and what it does, and the way in which Schoenberg really begins to capture the bitterness of Byron's poem, I think. Now, Schoenberg, of course, would have immediately recognized an opportunity in the fact that Beethoven, at the very same time as Byron was writing this poem, was dealing with Napoleon in his own way, as we discussed a little bit before. And so Schoenberg pulls Beethoven into this piece, and he does so very literally. In fact, it's not just Beethoven's spirit, but there are some indications that Schoenberg gives us that he wants us to know that he's on to the Beethoven thing. And there are two things particularly that that tell us that Beethoven is inside this piece. The first one comes on the word victory, the earthquake voice of victory. Now, you will notice that Schoenberg set this word victory very deliberately with a quote. And you can see in the box at the top of the page what that quote is. And that obviously is the most famous musical motive in the world from the Beethoven Fifth Symphony. Da, 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 da. It's even the same notes as the Beethoven. And you can see as it goes on, this da, 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 da becomes a motive. And in fact, in the whole piece, we hear da, 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 da. So then the question is, why the Fifth Symphony? Why wouldn't he quote the Eroica Symphony, his former Napoleon symphony? Why that? Well, there's a reason for that. And it has to do with the word victory and something that was going on during World War II. If you look at the Morse code alphabet, bet you didn't expect that to come up here, you'll see that the Morse code for the letter V is short, 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 long. Da, 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 da. That's the letter V. And during World War II, the letter V became the symbol for the word victory, as particularly espoused by Winston Churchill. This is the famous sort of Winston Churchill pose. That's not a peace sign he's giving. That's the sign of V for victory. And He did it all the time. You will find dozens and dozens of photos of Churchill giving the V sign. It became actually, this is an early meme that Churchill was propagating here. V for victory. And so during World War II, this became a thing. So this da-da-da-dum that Schoenberg pulls into the piece is a deliberate reference. And this is how Beethoven kind of seeps into the piece all the hundreds of years later into the current moment. I'm going to play this place where this happens. Okay, now it happens very fast. This is the page before it happens. But if you listen really carefully, you'll hear the ba-ba-ba-bum.
Rapture of the strife, the earthquake voice of victory.
Do you hear it? There it is. I mean, he makes it explicit. It's not buried somewhere in the texture. He wanted us to make that connection. Now, whoops. The other reference to Beethoven happens at the very end of the piece. In fact, it happens on the very last note of the piece, the final chord. If you look at that chord that's outlined in red there, you'll notice that it is an E flat major chord. Now, as you heard from listening to the first few minutes of the piece, it's not a 12-tone piece, but it has real tonal elements in it for sure. But generally the language is not like super tonal until you get to this final blazing E flat chord. So I believe that is a very deliberate reference to Beethoven. How is it a reference to Beethoven? Well, the Eroica Symphony, of course, is in E flat. And I think that's how he brings the Eroica Symphony in. And if you think about it, the other piece that is Napoleon adjacent is the Fifth Piano Concerto, the Emperor Concerto, which is also in E flat. And so I think this is, without a doubt, in my mind, Schoenberg's way of further sort of bringing Beethoven into the center of this piece. It's a stunning chord, which you'll hear later when we play the end of the piece. So let me go through just a few of the final stanzas of the piece before we listen to the stunning ending of this piece, because this is where it becomes, I believe, just or speaks to us so directly in this moment in our history. So to go quickly through, this is the 11th stanza. Thine evil deeds are writ in gore, nor written thus in vain. So, everything you did is written in just violence. The triumphs tell of fame no more, or deepen every stain. If thou hadst died as honor dies, some new Napoleon might arise to shame the world again. If you had been killed in battle, killed with honor, well, that might have left room for a new Napoleon to come. And by the way, that's the only time in the whole poem that Napoleon's name is actually referenced. So in a way, it's lucky that you didn't die, because we don't want you to become a martyr. But who would soar the solar height to set in such a starless night? What a stunning line. Who would even want to go where you went to end up where you have ended up? Byron even goes after Napoleon's wife, or he uses Napoleon's wife to go after him. Napoleon was not married to Josephine, the great love of his life at that time. When Josephine was unable to conceive a child, he annulled that marriage and married an Austrian princess, and that's who he's married to at this time. And Byron says, and she, proud Austria's mournful flower, thy still imperial bride, how bears her breast the torching hour? Like, how's your wife doing in all of this? Like, how do you think she feels? Still clings she to thy side? Is she sticking with you? Must she too bend? Must she too share thy late repentance, long despair, thou throneless homicide? Like, does she have to be humiliated or share in your humiliation along with you? If she still loves thee, hoard that gem. 'Tis worth thy vanished diadem. He's saying, man, if your wife is still sticking with you after all of this, you better hold on to that because it's worth a lot more than all that power that you lost. Brings in the wife to this thing. There was a day, there was an hour, while earth was Gaul's and Gaul thine. There was a time when France was on top of the world, the most powerful country, and you were on top of France, the most powerful man. When that immeasurable power, unsated to resign, had been an act of purer fame than gather round Marengo's name. Basically, he's saying here, there was a time when you were so respected, and that just sort of gilded your decline. Basically saying you could have been great, but you weren't. Then he says, but thou forsooth must be a king and don the purple vest, as if that foolish robe could wring remembrance from thy breast. Where is that faded garment? Where the gewgaws that wert fond to wear, the star, the string, the crest? Like, you loved the trappings, didn't you? You loved the purple robe. You loved the scepter and the sword. Where are those things now? And then Byron says, vain froward child of empire, say, are all thy playthings snatched away? Now he's talking to Napoleon as if Napoleon is just a spoiled little child. His contempt knows no bounds for Napoleon. And then we get to the critical final stanza. And this is where all of this starts to come together. And the way Schoenberg sets it is so spectacular. Where may the wearied eye repose when gazing on the great? We are so tired of the tyrants. We are so tired. Is there anywhere we can look for a hero? A hero where neither guilty glory glows nor despicable state, a hero that is not guilty or despicable? Yes, he says, there is one. The first, the last, the best, the Cincinnatus of the West. He references a Roman emperor whom envy dared not hate, bequeath the name of Washington. To make men blush, there was but one. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of this long poem, written in the 18th century by this British poet, set by this German composer who's living in America, Byron says the one person we can look to as a hero is none other than George Washington, the so-called father of our country. It's so startling that that's where all of this leads, is to George Washington. Why George Washington? Why did Byron hold Washington in such esteem? Well, of all George Washington's accomplishments, leading the Continental Army, defeating the powerful British Army, presiding over the Continental Convention, becoming the first president, of all those things, his single greatest achievement, his single greatest act, the one act that really sort of stood out in world history, was the day he stepped down from power, was the day that he decided he would not run for president for a third term, and that he would facilitate the peaceful transfer of power from himself to the person whom the people elected. The first line of his farewell address, one of the most important speeches in our history, friends and citizens, the period for a new election of a citizen to administer the executive government of the United States being not far distant. And the time actually arrived when your thoughts must be employed in designating the person who is to be clothed with that important trust. It appears to me proper that I should now apprise you of the resolution I have formed, to decline being considered among the number of those out of whom a choice is to be made. He's saying, it's time for me to step down, which I will do. I will not run. I decline to run. It's impossible for us to understand, really, how unusual this was. In Europe, it was unheard of in modern European history. Nobody did that. No one willingly gave up power. Rulers were either deposed or died in office. This came as a shock. No one could believe that Washington was doing this. Some of you maybe have seen the musical Hamilton. If you have, you will remember a kind of stunning moment where Lin-Manuel Miranda illustrates this moment when George Washington steps down from power. And it's a scene where King George, the character of King George, learns of that George Washington is stepping down. And the king is incredulous. It's quite humorous in the setting, but he just can't believe it. Let's just listen to this little moment from Hamilton. Listen carefully to the words. Where are you?
They say George Washington's yielding his power and stepping away. Is that true? I wasn't aware that was something a person could do. I'm perplexed. Are they going to keep on replacing whoever's in charge? If so, who's next? There's nobody else in their country who looms quite as large.
There it is. in less than a minute, he says what Byron is saying in his poem. He has King George saying, he's stepping down from power. I didn't even know you could do that. And who's going to replace him? He looms the largest in this country. And of course, that single act that George Washington did set off the whole what they call American experiment, this experiment in democracy. And as we know, it held for several centuries, this peaceful transfer of power. And whoever you may be supporting in the election next week, I think we can all agree that the peaceful transfer of power has now kind of been called into question. And that's why I find this piece by Schoenberg, setting this poem by Lord Byron, to astonishingly speak to our current moment. No piece of music could be more appropriate for what's going on right now. And in that way, it's timeless. Not Napoleon, but Byron and Schoenberg are reiterating the lessons that we should have learned over history and reminding us why our nation has been different in many ways from other nations. So what I'd like to do now is listen to the end of this piece, spectacularly set by Schoenberg, when he gets to that final stanza, "Where may the weary eye repose?" You'll see how he starts to build the tension towards the naming of George Washington. And there's a very cool cello solo right at that moment too, by the way. So this is just about, there some of the stanzas that I went over, some I didn't go over. We're going to start with the part about Napoleon's wife, and we'll listen to just a few minutes to get to the end of this piece and the blazing E-flat major chord that happens at the end. And when we're done, by the way, I'd be happy to chat, to field questions, or hear any comments about this piece or any other that you would like to make. So the end of the Ode to Napoleon.
And she, proud Austria's mournful flower, thy still imperial bride, how bears her breast the torturing hour, still clings thee to thy side. Must she too bend, must she too share thy late repentance, long despair? Thou throneless homicide, if still she loves thee, hoard that gem, 'tis worth thy vanished diadem. Then haste thee to thy sullen isle, and gaze upon the sea. That element may meet thy smile, it ne'er was ruled by thee. Or trace with thine idle hand in loitering mood upon the sand that earth is now as free, that Corinth's pedagogue hath now transferred his byword to thy brow. Thou, Timor, in his captive cage, what thoughts will there be thine, while brooding in thy prison rage? But one, the world was mine, unless like he of Babylon, all sense is with thy scepter gone. Life will not long confine that spirit poured so widely forth, so long obeyed, so little worth. Or like the thief of fire from heaven, wilt thou withstand the shock and share with him the unforgiven, his vulture and his rock? Foredoomed by God, by man accursed, and that last act, though not thy worst, the very thing's arch-mock. He in his fall preserved his pride, and, if a mortal, had as proudly died. There was a day, there was an hour, while earth was Gaul's, Gaul thine, when that immeasurable power, unsated to resign, had been an act of purer fame than gathers round Marengo's name, and gilded thy decline through the long twilight of all time, despite some passing clouds of crime. But thou, forsooth, must be a king, and don the purple vest, as if that foolish robe could wring remembrance from thy breast. Where is that faded garment, where the gewgaws thou wast fond to wear, the star, the string, the crest? Vain throw a child of empire, say, are all thy playthings snatched away? Where may the wearied eye repose, when gazing on the great, where neither guilty glory glows, nor despicable state? Yes, one, the first, the last, the best, the Cincinnatus of the West, whom envy dared not hate, bequeathed the name of Washington to make man blush. There was but one.
There you have it, the Ode to Napoleon, or parts thereof. You heard the beginning and the end. The middle is just as good. For those of you who don't know the piece, the whole thing lasts about 16 minutes. It's not a long piece. I urge you to check out the whole thing. And for those of you who are intrigued, I really urge you to play it. It's super fun to play. It's really fun. Um, uh, and you know, with enough rehearsal time, can really be done very effectively. So that's my presentation, a piece of music that really speaks to us right now, and really should cause all of us to think about our place in history. So I'm very happy to let's see, if there are some questions in the chat, and yeah, great. And any questions that you have, also, if you can think of other pieces that you think carry a political message, for example, it'd be great to hear of that. What are some of your favorite contemporary pieces that serve as similar political commentary? Okay, that's what I was just talking about. Some others, many of you are probably familiar with the Shostakovich Eighth String Quartet, for example, and much of Shostakovich's music, like, for example, the Babi Yar Symphony, and those things. You know, Shostakovich, practically all his music was political in some way, and really made commentary on what was happening directly in his time and his place. Shostakovich was a unique figure, right, in that he not only was a witness to a certain historical time and place, he was part of that history as he was commenting on it. So almost any of the music of Shostakovich, but then some are more explicitly so, like I think the Eighth String Quartet. Also, you know, a piece that I love, maybe some of you know, there's a piece by Frederick Shevsky called "The People United Shall Never Be Defeated," which is a giant set of piano variations, in the sort of inspired by or in the mold of the Goldberg variations and the Diabelli variations. And the theme of that is a song that came out of Chile during the terrible years of their dictatorship. "The People United Shall Never Be Defeated." And it's this popular song that kind of went around the world and was adopted by many, many people who were fighting tyranny in some way. And Shevsky turned this, you know, he was appalled by what was happening in Chile, and he turned this song into these massive set of piano variations. That's a spectacular piece. It's like an hour long. You should check that one out. So there are lots of pieces out there. There's a question: what was the general reaction to his piece when it was first premiered? And I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the circumstances of the premiere. There is a recording of the piece with Schoenberg conducting, which I've heard. I don't think it's very good, actually. But I don't know how people responded to it. I do know, though, from having played it many times now, that if it's kind of explained what's going on in the piece, if you set it up correctly, audiences love this piece. It's actually really fun to listen to. And if you're really clued in to what's going on, I've had great reaction to it. Just a note for you: after you give your closing remarks, there will be a 10-second delay before the live stream ends. I will let you know. Okay, sorry, that was meant for me and not for you. I also have a comment here that the Bartók Sixth String Quartet is another piece that makes some commentary on the situation, written at about the same time as the Ode to Napoleon, I believe, and is also a commentary on the sort of desolation that was happening in Europe at that time. So, are there any other questions or comments? Do any of you know of any pieces that maybe speak to political moments like this?
I think that marks the end of our questions for now. If you could give any closing remarks, that would be great, and I'll let you know once the live stream has concluded.
Um, you know, I should say vote. Everybody should vote on Tuesday. It is quite an important election. I will also say, on a very different note, I love Schoenberg's music. I love Schoenberg's music. He's one of my favorite composers, and people are a little scared of Schoenberg, and I understand why. But actually, when you delve into it, it's just enormously exciting and enlivening music. And play it, understand it, and there's a whole world there that is deeply satisfying. And I think the Ode to Napoleon is a really good place to start. So thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate you having you here today, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Michael, can you hear me? I don't know if my voice is coming through.
Yes, Paul. Hi.
Yeah, this is Paul Katz. Yeah, so I just wanted to thank you for a really spectacular presentation. I was watching every minute of it, thinking of today's political situation, and I didn't know if you were actually going to bring us around to that or not at the end, but yeah, it's so unmistakable, and I appreciate that so much. Well, from a musical standpoint, I appreciate so much kind of the insights you gave us into the work itself. But beyond that, I think something that's very important to me that in a way is kind of subliminal to Cello Bello, but also important, is just kind of a sense of the social responsibility of the musician and society. And that in addition to the music that we make and that we love and that we are absorbed in, we also need to be citizens of the world and not have our heads in the sand. So on that level also, I just want to thank you, because I think this was really quite a spectacular presentation and an important one.
No, thank you, Paul. Paul, have you ever played the Ode to Napoleon?
No, I don't know it at all, and that was particularly thrilling to me. Yes.
Yeah, great.
Well, yeah.
There it is. Right in there. I'm very honored to have been here today for the first ensemble chat, Paul. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, and that's the other part, of course, that Cello Bello now has a section on chamber music, and so we're honored that you gave our first presentation